Well, as we enter the month of May, with the auspicious 11th almost upon us, don't worry, you still have time. This week, I had a stark reminder of my increasing age. No, it wasn't the silver in my beard, thank you very much, nor the hair that is disappearing from my head, how very dare you, but rather a memory that I discovered was many years earlier than I had recalled. Do you remember when we watched Grandad march in the VE Day parade at Buckingham Palace? Asked my sister, who had escaped the cacophony of her brood for a brief moment. Of course, replied my sister. I can even remember what I wore. Well, I can't work it out. Was that the 60th anniversary of VE Day? No, my sister replied ominously. That was the 50th anniversary. And as she said that, another bit of the beard grew grey, another forehead follicle flopped off. Could it really be 25 years ago that I, as a 13-year-old, went up to watch my granddad, he who received his basic RAF training at St. Athan, march along the Mall under the watchful gaze of the Queen, and more importantly, my nan? The evening following that conversation with my sister, as I spoke online with a member of our churches who was yet to be born 25 years ago, I particularly felt my advancing age, and I imagined myself appearing on the screen as old Father Time. Of course, some of you won't only have memories of the 50th anniversary of VE Day, but of the 40th, 30th, 20th, some even of that very first Victory in Europe Day, the 8th of May, 1945. Our newest nonagenarian told me this week that she can remember gathering with her teenage friends at a street party on Merthyr Road that day, as they riotously celebrated the end of conflict in Europe, at least for a short period anyway. Well, as some of us were strongly reminded this week, now is not the time for riotous street parties. The countrywide celebrations that had been planned for next Friday have been massively scaled back, and instead we are invited to mark the day in our homes and on our doorsteps with a public sing-along of We'll Meet Again amongst the day's offerings. Some in our churches will be relieved by this, feeling that celebrations have become more political, even jingoistic over the years. And others will be disappointed by the lost opportunity to remember those who sacrificed much in the cause of freedom. Well, one voice that will be heard next Friday through a replaying of his VE Day speech is that of Winston Churchill, a figure who continues to divide opinions 75 years on. This was evident just last year when Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell's two-word reply to the question of whether Churchill was a hero or villain garnered many headlines and generated much debate. And whether you're someone who agrees with McDonnell's assessment of Churchill as villain or voted to declare Churchill as the greatest Briton in the BBC poll, many historians do argue that opinions on Churchill were as divided when he first became Prime Minister as they are today. An environment of disquiet around him at the time, which is excellently portrayed in the acclaimed, if sometime apocryphal film, The Darkest Hour, that I re-watched this week. In what is a delicious irony for those who use Churchill as the poster boy for Brexit, the phrase, the darkest hour, was actually used by him to refer to the dire circumstances in France in a speech he made shortly after D-Day, in which he emphasized the importance of standing in solidarity with our European allies. It was only in later years that the darkest hour became a shorthand for the time in which the United Kingdom appeared to be under direct threat of invasion, following the evacuation of the British Army from Dunkirk and prior to the successes in the so-called Battle of Britain. Now, Churchill wasn't the first political leader to use the metaphor of darkness to refer to periods of national crisis or of personal distress. In this week's psalm, we encounter another great political leader who was no stranger to controversy himself and who had bitter experience of the shadowlands of life, King David. I'm sure to offend some people when I suggest that the psalm's likely author and the inebriated politician had quite a lot in common. from military successes, political prowess, and a natural eloquence to personal vulnerabilities and very public humiliations. It was because of such experiences, not in spite of them, that we have Psalm 23 in our treasury of Psalms today. In 6 short verses, David manages to convey the frailty of the human experience and the strength of God's provision, abundance, and restoration. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Perhaps here I should confess that Psalm 23 is not actually one of my favorites. If I had to draw up a top 10 of my favorite Psalms, it probably wouldn't make that list. This is partly to do with the sentence structure of the Psalm and its subsequent arrangements. As a child, that single comma in the opening line did little to dissuade me from my interpretation that the psalmist did not want the Lord as his shepherd. And speaking of the flock defenders, is shepherd really the metaphor I want to use when it comes to God? Do you know where shepherds eventually lead their sheep? No, still waters, oily heads, the sake of God's name, the psalm just doesn't really easily connect. Except that is for verse 4. Green pastures mean little to me, but a time of darkness I can identify with. After all, the 13-year-old boy who waved a flag as his grandfather saluted the Queen was the same boy whose life had been turned upside down with a single phone call just weeks earlier. Darkness, I can do. The death of my mother was for me my first significant journey into that dark valley. And I wonder what it was for you. Perhaps like me, it was a death that beckoned you in. The loss of a parent, child, sibling or partner or friend. For others of us, it would be a different type of loss. The end of a relationship, a period of unemployment, a betrayal of trust. Still others will have encountered the darkness during times of ill mental health, at the hands of neglect or abuse by supposed loved ones, or through engaging with climate crises, global pandemics, or a whole range of macro factors. The contours of our valleys will be different, but many of our experiences will be shared. I wonder too what you remember about your bleak pilgrimage in that dark valley. What, if anything, did you discover there? Who, if anyone, did you encounter? Perhaps some of us grew accustomed to our darkness. Like on a dark night, perhaps our vision altered in the dark, and we began to make out things that were hidden before. Just as the great stars of the sky, which are hidden from view in the day, but can be seen and appreciated in the darkness, perhaps some of us learned a new way of seeing, thanks to the dark. Perhaps we are right now. Perhaps others of us saw signs of new life or personal growth deep within the darkness, like that of the caterpillar in the cocoon that we spoke of, or the seed in the ground, the baby in the womb, Jesus in the tomb. Perhaps our time in the darkness led to new or resurrected life. And perhaps others of us remember nothing but the darkness. No light, no life, just the abyss. And to pretend otherwise would just be a lie. Whatever our experience of the dark valley, I am thankful that David doesn't offer a picture of faith that ignores it. I am thankful that the shepherd that enables him to lie in green pastures isn't seen to divert him away from the dark valleys, but rather is with him as he walks through them. And this is where the radical nature of this pastoral poem comes alive. For me, the image of a shepherd doesn't connect until I remember that in the ancient Near East, kings were often referred to as shepherds of their people. The message that I hear then is that God is a king, a leader, a deity like no other. God is not like a politician who says, we're all in this together, before heading back to their mansion where they turn a pandemic into profit. God is not like a monarch who looks down on their subjects from a golden throne, or the boss who applauds their workers while cutting their pay, or even the friend who tells you to look on the bright side and pretend the darkness isn't there. Rather, God is the king who puts on his walking boots and accompanies you through the darkest valley. The boss who packs her first aid kit for a hike through hell. The friend who says, whatever comes your way, however all-encompassing the darkness gets, I am with you every step of the journey. I will never leave you. You might trip, give up, shout at me, or worse, but I will always be there. We will get through this. From the shadows of the valley to a feast laid out for you. From the darkness of the cross to the light of resurrection. From the gloom of war, personal loss, or global distress towards the promise of peace, restoration, and universal shalom. Perhaps then you might share David's refusal to fear, for God is, has been, and will always be your comfort in the darkness. Or perhaps the darkness still feels bleak and impenetrable for now. In either case, I won't be delighting in Churchill's vehemence of victory next Friday, but might well heed other words of his next time I find myself in a darkened valley. The phrase that he used to start each day with and end most conversations with. Well, the version that he used when a woman was present, anyway. Keep plodding on, for God is with us and always shall be. Amen.
The 23rd Psalm. This I know. My life is in your hands. I have nothing to fear. I stop, breathe, listen. Beneath the whirl of what is a deep down quiet place. You beckon me to tarry there. This is the place where unnamed hungers are fed, the place of clear water refreshment. My senses stilled, I drink deeply, at home in timeless territory. In peril, I remember, death's dark veil holds no menace. I lean into you. Your eternal presence comforts me. I am held tenderly. In the midst of all the troubles that threatens and diminishes, you set abundance before me. You lift my head. My vision clears. The blessing cup overflows. This I know. You are my home and my hope, my strength and my solace, and so shall you ever be.